All right. So there are a lot of people here that have been knocked out of the church because of concerns around the truth claims. There probably aren't many people in the world who are as familiar with the truth claims as you. And so I want to do just a little bit of a lightning round where I'm going to bring up, let's just say 6 or 8 of the biggest issues that people have with the church's truth claims, and have you just give us a brief response to each as to how you stay in spite of the problems with the truth claims. Does that make sense? As a way to give others maybe a guide to staying as well.
So is this like jury selection where I have some peremptory challenges?
No. Okay, so the belief in anthropomorphic God, there are a lot of people that are just like, there's too much suffering and pain in the world. I just can't buy the idea of an anthropomorphic God. How do you stay in spite of that being a central Mormon doctrine?
To me, that makes very little difference in my faith. In fact, it makes no difference at all.
Why?
Because God is not an approachable entity for me, and so what form he or it takes really makes no difference.
But to Mormonism, it is an anthropomorphic God.
Yeah.
And
so when I go back to the earliest years of Mormonism, I see that was a rapidly evolving doctrine. It started out as basically, I think what is called modalism, where there was only one God who could appear in different forms. And that's what you see in the first vision accounts, and that gradually, over a period of about a half dozen years, moves to the point where he says, well, now the Trinity has 3 people, and God the Father is a personage of flesh, and the Son a personage of flesh, and the Holy Ghost is a personage of spirit. But that's not where we started, and there was an interim where in the Lectures of Faith it said, how many are in the Godhead? And it says 2. The Father is a personage of spirit, and the Son is a personage of flesh. And that was canonized. That was Scripture until 1921. The Doctrine and Covenants had 2 parts. The doctrine was the Lectures on Faith. Covenants and Commandments were the Revelations. In, I think, 1921, we cut the first part out and uncanonized it, but that, in fact, for a century had been the doctrine of the church. But Joseph moved past that. What that says to me is that's representational of where he was at the time. Is that the actual status of things? I don't know, but I don't care.
So you don't feel bound by where the church is now on a doctrine of God.
No.
You can go to whichever point you feel most comfortable.
Jolene gave me a book for Christmas, God. I think it's called, the subtitle is Social History, Ray Zaslin. I would recommend people read that because it walks you through, in I think a very credible fashion, how the concept of God has evolved over the millennia in various faith traditions. It's very eye-opening.
What about people who say, I'm not sure I buy that number one, Jesus ever really lived on the earth, was a historical figure, and if Jesus was a historical figure, I can't buy that he really rose from the dead?
I think that there are 2 elements that you have to look at when you look at the life of Jesus. One is the teachings. Those teachings have held up quite well, and I think are still the yardstick for people, whether they're people of faith or not. Those are teachings, principles that still are durable and are probably at least as true today as they were then. The other, the more ethereal concept is, okay, what about the atonement? How does that deal with sin? That's just not been an issue that has been of significance to me. I'll figure it out later. I'm content to try to live the good life, and we'll see later on how that plays. I know a lot of people spend a lot of time fretting over that. It just hasn't risen to that level of significance for me.
What about the fact that the first vision story just kept changing over time, kept evolving, kept adding things?
Sure.
What's kept you from just saying, well, Joseph was just kind of making it up, and the big fish grew bigger over time?
Because I looked at the data points and saw how it happened.
Well, why isn't that a problem for you?
Not a problem for me at all, because I view religion as evolutionary, and that was the evolution of his theology. And so when he retold the story to his current stage of theological evolution, he told it in a different fashion. If you line up the versions of the first vision in a vertical column, then line up in a second vertical column everything else that he said about the nature of God or wrote about it, and then put them chronologically, both of them evolve, and if you read across, they always match. So
why
in
doesn't that
1835, his account of the first vision matched what he was preaching then. 1838, both changed.
So why doesn't that undermine his credibility in your
Why
eyes?
should it? How do you reduce the infinite to finite terminology? I can't do that, and so I'm willing to extend to him that same flexibility. Whatever he had as a first vision, how do you reduce that even to words? And is that going to remain constant, or is it going to be in flux as your own sophistication and your own experience in life changes?
But some would say there's
problem with it.
enough concrete things, how many beings were there, what beings showed up, what happened, that you know...
It's all consistent with the evolution in his theology. Which of those
some would say what it should have been is sort of this is what happened, and he sticks with it.
They can say that. That doesn't grasp what reality is.
What do you mean? Reality is in what sense?
How do you reduce the infinite into any capsule that you can say this is the way it is and it will never change?
You tell the story about how it happened, and you kind of stick with that original story.
But Joseph didn't understand the concept of God in its complexity.
But he could remember what really happened.
Could he? How do you have an experience? I have never had an experience like that. I can't imagine that you could take that experience and convert that into something concrete. A mundane example, we have a monthly testimony meeting. In a microcosm, we are replicating his experience there. In that, we have people who walk to the front, stand in front of the microphone, and try to put into words experiences that they have had that aren't readily translated into words. It tends to work because there are enough people in the congregation who have had similar experiences that they kind of say, okay, yeah, I can connect with that because I felt the same type of thing. Whereas somebody reading the text of that testimony would probably scratch his head and say, I don't know where this person's going. I think that is analogous, several-fold reduced in complexity to the task that Joseph Smith had. How do you take that out-of-body, out-of-consciousness experience and reduce that to a single written statement that doesn't change? I have no problem. In fact, I would have a greater problem if it didn't change, because that would say we're kind of stuck in a rut. If we truly believe that we are on an upward path of understanding and knowledge and continuing revelation, then why do we fret that things change? You can go in any Mormon congregation and say, everybody in favor of continuing revelation, all the hands would shoot up. And then you can say, all of you who are comfortable with change, you would see people looking around nervously and wondering whether they should raise their hand. How do you have that paradox there?
I don't think
if you're going to have revelation, you're going to have change.
I don't think people have a problem with change. They have a question about Joseph's integrity.
If they feel that represents a lack of integrity on his part, I can't help him. It doesn't to me. That's your question. It's not a problem for me. It never has been.
Okay, what about...
And I dug deeply on that, and my article in the Journal of Mormon History on the first vision accounts lays out exactly where I went with that and why I think this is not only defensible, but it's the how would you expect it to be any other way?
What about, they say the Book of Mormon is clearly not an ancient record of Native Americans. It's not historical at all. Mm-hmm. The plates weren't even used. Mm-hmm. It's plagiarized from all these different sources. It's just not a credible set of scripture because it was fiction and made up by Joseph.
We can say that several of the books in the Bible are fictional as well, and they are.
So throw those out too, because okay, and why not? For you.
The greatest books in the history of the world tend to be fiction. Why? Because they are conveying truths that are best conveyed by a writer who is able to capture that essence and put that into words that don't necessarily represent an actual occurrence of events. The great books tend to be fiction. But fiction is not evil. Myth is not evil. Myth is one of the greatest vehicles for conveying truth. So if you look at the Book of Mormon and say, all right, over on this extreme, it's a word-for-word translation of an ancient record. And over on this extreme, it's a 19th century document produced by Joseph Smith, and then you've got various alternatives in between. I'm over here, and I have no problem with that. The same lady that I talked about from Wesley who came and talked to our study group read the Book of Mormon in preparing her lessons for our study group, and she said, I respect the Book of Mormon as authentic American canon. But she said, my view of it is that it is a book-length Midrash on the King James Bible. Midrash being the product of the interaction of a scholar with a text that results in another text. Think of the Talmud as being a very lengthy Midrash on the Hebrew Bible. And I think she nailed it. If you judge the Book of Mormon on the basis of its fidelity to whatever historical narrative you choose, then it may come up wanting. If you say, does this book have a different effect than other books, then it's a no-brainer. Because for going on 2 centuries now, that book, for whatever it is, does things that no other book does. And you don't explain that away easily. I talk to a lot of people about this, and I can ask 3 questions and I know how they're going to go. I know the answers to the first 2. Did you read it from cover to cover? No. It's kind of boring. What do you remember about what you read? Well, there are a lot of wars in there. What did you experience when you read it? Oh, well. And then they'll tell you. And it had nothing to do with the actual content. It was the encounter. That became a touchstone. And so whatever criticism you want to level at it for how it came into being, or even what Joseph thought he was producing. And if you think of the role or the process of a mystic, Joseph was a mystic, that some things happened through him that he didn't understand himself. What he produced as a fairly young man achieved something that no subsequent book has achieved. And those who get all upset about arguing historicity, anachronisms in it, I think miss the real point and they throw the baby out with the water. Work it backwards. Say, what is the effect? Then you reverse engineer that and you come up saying, it really doesn't matter so much how it came into being. It's what is that doing? What is the life that book has taken on that it still has today? And I see that missing from most of the discussion from both of the poles. The BYU people are willing to die on the hill of historicity. And I just look at it and say, good luck. And then there are others who want to throw the whole thing out.
Did you just point at me? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
And others who are ready to trash the whole thing because, well, we can show that it's not authentically ancient. And my comment to both of them is, grow up. You're missing the point.
How about the fact that Joseph claimed to be translating plates and with the Book of Abraham claimed to be translating the papyrus? Why isn't that an impeachment of his integrity? Because he clearly wasn't translating as he claimed to.
Yeah, there are 2 possibilities there, particularly with the Book of Abraham, because we don't need to speculate about gold plates. We don't have the gold plates. We do have the papyrus. And the papyrus has been translated by Egyptologists. It had nothing to do with the Book of Abraham. It is a funerary text. How about that? It was buried with a mummy. Now, Joseph thought differently, and you can come down one of 2 ways on that. You can say either he was consciously trying to perpetrate a fraud. I don't think that's the case. Brodie was there in her first edition of No Man Knows My History, but she pulled back from that in the second edition and at least said, I don't believe he was a prophet, but I think he authentically felt that he was not just trying to perpetrate a conscious fraud on people. I think the other possibility is that he looked at that papyrus and he genuinely thought that was the signature of Father Abraham. And that's what he told people who visited the Nauvoo house, as he would show them the mummy and show them the papyrus. See, that's the signature. Well, that papyrus isn't within 1,000 years of when it needed to be, if that could even have happened. So was he deceiving everybody? I don't think he was consciously doing so. Was he self-deceiving? Maybe, but I think that he was in that milieu where he really thought this is what was happening. And yet, it's not the direct relationship between the ancient artifact and the modern text. It's the process through which that flowed through a human and produced a text. Now, he was better at it earlier on, because the effect of the Book of Mormon is much more profound and durable than the effect of the Book of Abraham. The Book of Abraham is just kind of this anachronism. And this faith tradition never accepted the Book of Abraham, never canonized it. They did the Book of Mormon.
But so that's cool, but you're a scientist, and if in 2018, I claimed that an angel gave me plates, and then you said, well, let me see him, and I go, oh, the angel took them back. You wouldn't go, wow, John was a prophet, and we should give him the benefit of the doubt. You would say, John's a fraud. And if I claim to translate a language that we didn't have sort of the sources for, and then scientists later figured out the sources for it and said, yeah, well, John didn't translate anything because he got it all wrong. You as a scientist would say, John's a charlatan. You would.
Well, there were non-scientists in 1830 who said that of Joseph Smith for that very reason.
I'm just saying, why are you giving Joseph a pass in terms of his integrity?
I don't need to give him a pass because I'm looking at the effect, not the cause. I'm looking at a book that has been around for 2 centuries that has changed people's lives into the millions. More than any other element of Mormonism, it has been the Book of Mormon that has brought people to that different level of living and of spirituality. To me, that speaks the conclusion of it. How it got there is not of much concern to me.
How have you gotten over Joseph marrying other men's wives, 14, 15-year-old girls, and sort of the way that he used his power in some sense to be very predatory sexually?
Oh, I think it was wretched. I haven't gotten over it. You expect perfection?
So
it's
how
complex.
do you...
It's sausage making.
But no, it's sausage. But why doesn't
You think religion is clean?
No, but why doesn't that spoil the enterprise for you? Because that's a pretty egregious and predatory and vile set of behaviors.
Yep.
How could you build a spirituality and religious participation on a founder that was so vile? If I did what Joseph Smith did, you wouldn't do this interview with me today. Let alone base your life on whatever theology that I purported.
Are you going to confess something now?
No. I haven't. For all my weaknesses, I
wouldn't leave, even if you did. At some point, and I can't remember when or why, and I think it was more a process than an event, the men, the personalities, came to mean much less than the essence of what this is all about. And particularly as I got into the McKay diaries, then I saw in graphic detail, yeah, these are men, and sometimes they're doing things that I didn't approve of. And eventually came to the conclusion, yeah, what do you expect? Why would you think it would be any different? The challenge to us is to look past their foibles and say, all right, in spite of those in some cases, what has happened? What is available to us? Does that have value to us? And as long as the answer to that still is yes, then I think people will stay and will be enriched by the experience. Lester used to joke that he knew people who would say, I have a firm testimony of Hugh Nibley. And we would chuckle about that, and that turned out that wouldn't have been a good basis for one's testimony. But I don't think you should say, I have a firm testimony of such and such. I don't think it's necessary to say I have a firm testimony of Joseph Smith, because certainly he had flaws, and he had deep flaws, and we're only now coming to grips with acknowledging the depth of some of those flaws. But it was in spite of that that he did something. There was a statement that Brigham Young made. It was in the 1850s, and it was in a general conference address, and he was talking about a detractor in the earlier days who was not Mormon, who kept picking away at Joseph Smith, and Brigham said, I told him it wouldn't matter to me if he had done this, or slept with his neighbor's wife, or done this. And I read that the first time I encountered it and thought, that's interesting. You wouldn't hear that in general conference today. But I wonder if he was talking in hyperbole, or if he was actually acknowledging the rather deep flaws that Joseph Smith did have. But then he said, it's the doctrine that he produced that will save you and me.
What does the temple mean to you right now in your Mormonism? What does your temple participation mean to you?
My temple participation is very scant, almost nil. It's not a centerpiece of my religious life at this point, nor my wife's. I respect it. We were married in the temple. I have great hope that what we were taught there and the ordinances that were performed there will lead to the end that we were told they would. I treasure the idea that our family will be cohesive in the next life as well as this, although I will confess, I don't have a clue what that means, and I don't think anybody else does either. And if they think they do, I'll ask them 2 questions. Whose house are you going to go to for Thanksgiving, and how many turkeys do you order? And you'll figure out right then, we don't have a clue about the details. So we have hope, and we cling to that hope.
Why, there are churches these days that that allow women full leadership participation, that don't have sort of the racist baggage that we have and continue to have, and that don't have LGBT policies that are tripling the suicide rates amongst our home base. Why isn't contemporary Mormon racism, sexism, and homophobia enough to take you out of the church and to take you somewhere like Community of Christ or Unitarians or other progressive Protestant churches? Why aren't those a problem enough for you to eliminate your affiliation?
You're asking me, in essence, to prove a negative, and I can't do that.
What do you mean?
If I were driven away by that, I could tell you why I was driven away. If I'm not driven away, I don't know how to answer why is that not capable of driving me away.
Why can't you answer that? I think that's a fair question. Why aren't those things a big enough problem for you to drive you away?
Perhaps because in the midst of doing all of this, I came to the conclusion that, look, this church is the sum total of the people in it. And we strive for greater things. Sometimes we get there, sometimes we get in our own way. What do you expect? And I look at other traditions, and if you think we've got problems, move across the street and you'll see they got problems too.
What if someone were to say, you're a white, affluent male, so dripping with privilege, of course you stay in this church, it was made for you. Is it a possibility that part of why you're able to stay is because of the privilege?
I don't know.
Have you thought about that? No. It's kind of utilitarian. It's kind of the good that it is and does for you outweighs everything else. Is that fair to say?
It works. It still works. And I think this is really going to be the key, particularly for the millennials, whether it's this church or some other church. I think that you can reduce it to 2 statements. And I don't think it'll be an oversimplification. If it works, I stay. If it doesn't work, I leave. And I think that really captures a lot of the essence of what institutional religion is all about. If it works, in other words, is it making my life more understandable, more purpose-filled? Is it connecting me with a higher power that I sense is there even if I don't understand what that is? Is it connecting me to a community of believers that even if we're not like-minded, we are like-believing? And that group is stronger than the sum of its parts. If it's doing all of those things, it's working, and I will stay. I think there are some people who might stay out of a sense of duty even if they can't answer that question. I don't know how to say, what would that do to me if I were in that position? I don't know. It's a hypothetical question I can't answer.
What would you say if someone came to you and said, if I stay in this church, give the church my name, give the church my reputation, give the church my money, give the church my time, I am actually aiding and abetting and being complicit in the harm that's being done to women, to youth, to adults, to people of color, to the perpetuating the racism, and to the damage being done to our LGBT youth. And so I, in good conscience, can't give my time, name, and money to an organization causing so much harm.
Well, you could say the same thing about being a citizen of the United States, particularly under the current administration. Does my maintaining my U.S. citizenship and paying my income taxes mean that I am consciously aiding and abetting what's going on in the White House today? I think it's the same question. Do I resign my United States citizenship and move to a different country? I guess I could, but I'm not inclined to do that. Neither am I inclined to leave Mormonism, even if it may be loaded with flaws. Am I perpetuating the downside of it by staying in it? That would probably be flattering to think that I had that kind of effect. I don't have that kind of effect. If anything, by staying in, I have the chance of making a little bit better. But I don't think for an instant that I am helping to perpetuate something that is less than noble. It may not be reaching its potential, but it won't be for lack of my having been there and trying to make it better.
What if someone were just to say the current leadership are not acting in a way that's worthy of my participation? The leaders just aren't worthy of our engagement.
Then they've got a decision to make. I'm not going to make that for them.
Would you agree that there's some people who would probably be better off leaving? And if so, who might those types of people be?
Well, when Dialogue celebrated its 50th anniversary a year and a half ago, we had a two-man panel at the end of the symposium prior to the banquet. And one of the Q&A questions was addressed to the other person who was a retired general authority. And he had said in response to a prior question, sometimes you have to lean in and try to make it work. And this young gentleman said, what if you've leaned in and it doesn't work? And the response was, I can't ask you to stay if it's not working for you, because you have to try to find something that will work for you. And that would be my response. I would not want people to stay in something that's not helping them. If they can find a better way in some other venue, I think that's going to help them. Maybe they'll come back later and enrich it, maybe they won't. But I don't think that it's morally responsible for us to say, even though something, whatever that something is damaging you, you are duty bound to stay in there and continue to be damaged.
Do you think the church is safe for LGBT youth right now?
That's a broad generalization. I think that there are LGBT youth that are safe in it now, to a large extent because of people like Stephanie and others in other organizations who are making it safe. I think that there are more and more families in the church that, feeling compelled to make a choice between the church and their gay child, are saying, I will stay with my gay child, either in the church or we will go out of the church together. And I applaud them for making that decision. There's been too much pain, too many kids literally thrown out of the houses in the past. But I see that that's changing now. I can't put numbers on it, but there are more and more families that are accepting. There are more and more congregations that are accepting of LGBT youth and adults. And I think it's going to be at that level that the LGBT climate in the church will change. It's going to be the trickle-up revelation. It's going to be the people in the pews who will, in essence, obey in the breach and say, we will love and honor and support these individuals and their families, no matter what those compositions of families look like. And how are you going to stop them? And I see that as happening now. I see an affirmation, which is kind of the grandfather, grandmother, if you will, of LGBT support groups in the church, that since about 2005, this is where John Gustav Rathel, the current president of it, says it started for him. He said, I had an overwhelmingly strong spiritual urge to return to the church. And he said it made no sense intellectually, but it wouldn't go away. And he said, as I have talked to other LGBT people who have come back, they all made their journey back into Mormonism after that time, at about 2005. There's a spirit brooding out there that is bringing a lot of these people back. Not all of them, but enough that you have to shake your head and say, well, what's going on here? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but I see a much higher level of acceptance among the laity, and I see an increasing understanding among the hierarchy. I don't think it's a secret to anybody that this is a deeply divisive issue at the top. That's why we get mixed messages. And it's going to take a while for that to sort out. How long it will take and how it happens, I don't know.
Is the church a worthy and safe place for women, for especially our young women, to be sort of have to sit and witness an entire gender being marginalized as second class, being left out of leadership positions, and being very limited in sort of the role that they're encouraged to play in their lives?
It's not where it needs to be. To say that it's unworthy and unsafe, I think is a stretch, and I don't buy into that as a generalization. I think that a lot of young women are figuring out how to make it work for them, even though they aspire to a different Mormon world, and maybe we'll get there. I talked to Paul Edwards years ago before what then was the RLDS Church decided to ordain women. Paul is a second great-grandson of Joseph Smith, and at the time was a general authority in the RLDS Church. I said, if you had it your way, would you ordain women? And this was a couple of years before they moved in that direction. He said, if I had it our way, I wouldn't ordain anybody. He said, if it's the community, or if it's the priesthood of all believers, he says, do you need to ordain anyone? But then they went the direction of ordaining women, and that's turned out, I think, pretty well for them. Should we ordain women? I have absolutely no basis to say that that can't be done. I don't see it scripturally, I don't see it historically. And I've dug rather deeply. There's a short chapter in the priesthood book about women. Lavina Fielding Anderson was one of the reviewers for it, and she called me afterwards. She said, I wish you had gone further in that chapter, but I understand why you didn't. And what that chapter says is that if you look at the entire record of Joseph Smith, he never said women will receive the male priesthood, but he never said they couldn't. And so it's in limbo.
Do you ever get discouraged about Mormonism?
Sure.
What things discourage you most?
The pace of change, the fact that we're not where we need to be.
We have a clapper here. Someone wants to clap. Have you ever gotten really down about it?
No, I don't think so. Helen Whitney asked me that question. She said, okay, everybody I've talked to, everybody I've interviewed has had a faith crisis. What's yours? And I thought, and I said, Helen, I guess I'm kind of boring because I can't remember any. I probably just grumbled all the way through.
What gives you hope? What keeps you kind of hopeful?
That I see signs of progress, that I see an enormous amount of strength and faith in the part of the people in the pews. That's the future of the church, but it was the past of the church as well. I told you about Elijah Sheets. If you go back and you read the week-to-week record of those 19th century pioneers, you figure out why they made it work, and that's where the strength of the church always has been, and it's where it is today.
So if you were to close tonight with sort of your testimony, and you can even add to it an appeal to those who have either left or are thinking about leaving, what you might say to them to consider giving the church another try or to stick with it, what final words would you offer, both as a testimony and as words of encouragement to stay if people are able to?
I don't have a simple formula that I can state. I hope that people will stay in long enough and give enough of themselves to see if they can make it better and see if it'll work better for them as a result. And if they can, then I hope they will stay and we'll get this thing moving forward at a faster clip. It's going to be bottom up. I have no question about that. That's where the strength is. That's where the force for positive change is going to come from. It won't be from a frontal assault on the hierarchy. It'll be from the people in the pews doing what they need to do, and that will radiate outwards. And that's enough to keep me in.
So your testimony, if you were to stand up and bear your testimony, what would you say?
It works. And I stay.
That's it? It works. Very pragmatic. Well, Greg Prince, there are many giants in our history that we owe a huge debt of gratitude to, and the reason why I and we brought you here is to learn from you and to hear from you and to, most importantly, give you our thanks for all that you've toiled and worked for over 32 years writing books for us, one still to come out. You have made an enormous difference in so many of our lives. In so many ways, you're a giant and you've meant the world to us. And we just want to conclude tonight by thanking you for all that you've done and all that you are. And we really appreciate and love you.
Thank
So
you.
would you guys join me in giving Greg our thanks?